Following the abolishment of mandatory death penalty for drug offences cases, the government of Malaysia has made an announcement on November 13, 2018 that the government is now looking at abolishing death penalty in all 33 crimes that are punishable by death under various Malaysian law. Malaysia is one out of 56 retentionist countries that still practice death penalty as a form of punishment, and that hanging to death at its methods of execution. In fact, Malaysia has several provisions in its domestic law that requires mandatory death penalty, including murder and certain firearms offences and treason. So what is mandatory? Mandatory, according to Merriam-Webster, the definition of mandatory is required by law or mandate, compulsory. So mandatory death penalty is a capital punishment that is required by law whether or not the sentencing judge think it fair, and it identifies grave shortcomings that affect system of automatic execution. In simpler way to say that anyone who found guilty under certain provision with punishable by mandatory death penalty, there will be no alternative punishment. The judge does not have any discretionary power to sentence the accused with other form of punishment, even if he think that the accused deserve otherwise. My name is Wana Hafiza, and today I will talk about Malaysia should abolish mandatory death penalty, and I hope I can persuade you to agree with that. There are several crimes in Malaysian judicial system which are punishable by mandatory death penalty, including Section 3, Firearms, Increased Penalties Act 1971, discharging of firearms in the commission of scheduled offences. Section 3A of the Firearms, Increased Penalties Act 1971, accomplice in discharge of firearms. Section 121A of Penal Code, which is treason, and Section 302 of the Penal Code, murder. Drug trafficking under Section 39B, Dangerous Drug Act, was under the crime that are punishable by mandatory death penalty. The Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, Hakam, as a sole national human rights institution in Malaysia, has been advocating for the abolishment of death penalty in Malaysia, and this also includes the mandatory death penalty. But people always argue that the accused has done something terrible. They killed people, so don't you think that they deserve to die because they had killed someone else? How this matter to you? Now let us look more closely at the needs of why mandatory death penalty should be abolished. According to Roger Hood, the automatic nature of this sentence is considered in many parts of the world to be arbitrary and disproportionate by reason of its failure to take into account the different circumstances in which offences may be committed and the different characteristics of offender, especially considering mitigating factor. Mandatory death penalty violate the rights of life, unjust, and deny someone else or individuals ability to be rehabilitated. Everyone has the right to life as prescribed under Article 3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, UDHR, and Article 6 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR. People also have the right to be free from torture and or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, as enshrined in the United Nations Conventions Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, UNCAT. In fact, the right to life lies in the provision of Article 5.1 of the Malaysian Federal Constitution. Other than that, the death penalty is not a deterrent, and it does not make the society safer. Malaysian Penal Code Act 574, with the provision of mandatory death penalty, has been enforced at least since the establishment of Malaysia. But have you heard in the news that have you heard any news that the numbers of crime of the murder or drug trafficking become less? If mandatory death penalty act as deterrent, we should by now be free to go out at night without fear being the victims of any crime. Don't you think so? In addition to that, there is a risk of innocent could be executed. Judicial system created by people does not have always properly orchestrated. US death row study has shown that 4% of the defendants sentenced to die are innocent. This figure lays bare extent to possible miscarriage of justice, suggesting that the innocence of more than 200 prisoners in the system may never be recognized. There are some cases where death penalty kills innocent people. In China, Ni Shubin, who was 20 years old when he faced a firing squad in 1995 after being convicted of rape and murder, is one of the cases of miscarriage of justice in the communist ruled country. The Supreme People's Court believed that the facts used in the original trial were unclear and the evidence is insufficient, and so changes the original sentence to one of innocent. In Australia, in 1992, Colin Campbell Ross was hanged after being convicted of rape and murder of a 12-year-old girl in Melbourne. He maintained his innocence over the charge, but failure of the justice has made him lost his life. After the case was reopened in 1990s using modern technique, Ross was eventually pardoned in 2008, 95 years after he was executed. Josh Sidney, a 14-year-old black boy, was electrocuted in South Carolina in 1944 for the murder of two girls. After an hours of investigation by the officer, the authority stated that Sidney confessed to the murder. This case still remained a very controversial one due to the fact that the judicial process shows a severe shortcoming. An example can be made out of this case by showing how the judicial system does not always properly orchestrate. He was the youngest person executed in the United States. More than 70 years, a judge Josh Stinney was the youngest person executed in the United States. More than 70 years later, a judge threw out of conviction, calling it a great injustice. Now that you have known why a mandatory death penalty should be abolished, I'm sure you will ask me, what is the best alternative form of punishment if we abolish mandatory death penalty? The human rights activists all over the world condemn the implementation of death penalty as it will take away people's right to life. What's more mandatory death penalty? There are some recommendations in which the government could take into consideration to remove mandatory death penalty in its law. As a baby step to total abolishment of death penalty, the government can still impose those punishment, but only limited for certain or serious crime, in accordance with the Article 6, Paragraph 2 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The states or the government that have not yet abolished the death penalty should only impose it to the most serious crimes. In international human rights jurisprudence, the term "the most serious crimes" has been interpreted by allowing the death penalty to be applied only for crime of murder or intentional killing. In this regard, all crimes or act not having intentional killing, such as drug-related offences, should be abolished. The judge should be given the discretionary power to determine the fair and just punishment to the accused. Our law says that when there is an actus reus, or the action, and the mens rea, the intention of killing someone, they can be sentenced to mandatory death penalty. But how if a person who is the victim of human trafficking and was severely brutally raped by the human trafficker kill the human trafficker? Do you think that she deserved to die? Or if a person who was being abused by her father by forcing her into prostitution since she was just a little child, do you think that she also deserved to die? Do you think that justice has been served? Think about that. The alternative punishment is, if we opt to abolish mandatory death penalty, is the imprisonment. The Malaysian Bar President, Mr. George Barusi, proposed that death sentence should not automatically be replaced with imprisonment or a minimum of 30 years after the death penalty is abolished. In order for the imprisonment to be just and fair and effective, we should various factors should be taken into account for each cases. This includes the offender's age, the past criminal record, mental capacity, and other or fear of other person, rehabilitation goals, degrees of cooperation with the authorities, and remorse, and the accused has shown remorse. But public will then argue that if we keep them in prison for a very long time, we waste public's money. What I can suggest is that a prison reform. Even if we keep that imprisonment, we can make them go to work. Perhaps prison department can engage with any business entities or corporation, and prisoner to work with this. Prisoner can work with this business entity. So the money they receive can be used to support the expenses of the prisoners. In this way, prison department could be less burden in terms of the cost, and at the same time the prisoner can get knowledge and the skills. How abolishing death penalty could impact us? Now, let us look at the benefit of abolishing mandatory death penalty in Malaysia. There are several impacts of abolishing mandatory death penalty. The first, we don't bear the risk of executing the wrong person. If you remember the cases that I've shared with you just now, we can avoid these incidents. Law is created by men and executed by men. Even angels makes mistake. What's more human? Second, give people a second chance. Sohakams conducted its routine visit to Penjara Wanita Kajang on November 2018, and I was one of the delegation. Among the places that we visited are the death row cells. I talked to some of the death row prisoners, and I can sense that there are some of them that are truly repent. Then who are we to deny them from having a second chance? And the last one, last but not least, is the abolishing mandatory death penalty. By abolishing mandatory death penalty, the judge will have discretionary power to determine the fair and just punishment, referring to case by case and taking into account of many other surrounding factors. So, in conclusion, the mandatory death penalty is an old form of capital punishment which is no longer relevant nowadays. Based on the Amnesty International Malaysia and International Intergovernmental Organization (INGO) based in Malaysia, who have been campaigning for the total abolition of capital punishment, says that the death penalty is a symptom of culture of violence, not a solution to it. Amnesty International Malaysia has come out with online petition to urge Malaysians to abolish the death penalty. Please show your support, and please help me to spend your time to sign petition at www.amnesty.my/urge Malaysia abolish death penalty. Okay, then, thank you.